always will be Aboriginal land. Green Left and Socialist Alliance are the hosts of this conference, and we stand with First Nations people for justice, sovereignty and land rights. We have an incredible lineup of guests speaking this weekend, and it's one of the biggest gatherings that we've had of Asia-Pacific socialists, and we want to learn from their experiences of struggle. Each conference has had a different theme, and this year we went with the theme of eco-socialism, not barbarism. Some of you may recognize this as a play on the powerful slogan attributed to German revolutionary Rosa Luxemburg, who at the beginning of the last century said that capitalist civilization cannot continue, and the idea that humanity faces a choice to either move forward into socialism or fall back into barbarism. We thought we would update that by taking into consideration the climate aspect, eco-socialism, and emphasizing the fact that this is not a lifestyle or abstract choice. We face a real choice here, where we really need to either step up the fight for eco-socialism if we want to avoid barbarism, because barbarism is already at our doorsteps. We are already seeing it when we see what is occurring in Gaza at this very moment. Even the far-right rallies here last weekend shows what will happen if the left don't provide a decent answer to the capitalist crisis of our time. So this is an opportunity for all of us to exchange ideas, to listen to each other, and to plan to bring down capitalism, a system that is destroying our environment, causing the mass extinctions of many species, and destroying our planet and our communities. Like I mentioned, Socialist Alliance and Green Left are hosting eco-socialism, and if you are inspired by this conference and you want to get involved in socialist politics, you can either join or stay in touch and keep track of any upcoming left-wing events and protests. After the speakers are finished, I will be passing around a contact sheet. We also have an information stall in the reception area near registration on the 4th floor, and we encourage you to go visit that stall if you have any questions for our members. Lastly, before I introduce the speakers, just want to give you some important information for your convenience. The toilets are located both on the 4th floor and the ground floor of the conference at Ballan Place. There is also a snack bar on this floor, just outside this room. Okay, on the panel tonight, we have, firstly, Ammar Ali Jan, Pakistan historian, activist, youth leader and academic. He is the General Secretary of the People's Rights Party and a member of the Council of Advisors of the Progressive International. Now, Ammar was meant to be here in person with us, but the Australian government shamefully rejected his visa. It's not the first time we've had our guests banned from crossing borders to speak at our conference. Well, we wish you were in the room with us, Ammar, but we are really happy to still have you here over video today. And our second speaker is Cyn Huang. Cyn is a student and labor activist based in Berkeley, California. They have served as the co-chair of the Young Democratic Socialists of America and is a member of Bread and Roses, a Marxist democratic socialist tendency in the DSA. And then, yeah, you can clap if you want to. And then lastly, we'll hear from Sue Bolton, a veteran socialist activist, a member of Socialist Alliance National Executive, and currently serving her 4th term on the Merri-bek City Council. And Sue has a standout record of working with residents and communities to empower them to stand up for their rights, including council support to end contracts with companies supporting the Israeli military. In a few seconds, you will be addressed by our three speakers, and after the speakers have spoken, we will have an opportunity for people here to ask them questions. I'd like to now introduce our first speaker of the conference, Ammar Ali Jan. Take it away, Ammar.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the organizers of the Ecosocialism, Not Barbarism conference, the Green Left Weekly, and the Socialist Alliance. So when I applied for the visa last year, I was placed on a panel with Leila Khalid. And I think that gave certain ideas to the authorities in Australia. And I was neither given a visa nor denied a visa. And then some friend in the embassy in Islamabad, in the Australian embassy, told me that's because of Palestine that you've been flagged. You know, this is of course a shame, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for your solidarity. But more importantly, nothing that happens to us is big enough, is comparable to the kind of violence, sacrifice, and resistance our Palestinian brothers and sisters are doing at the moment. Every sacrifice we give for the cause of Palestine is little. Right now, there's a new flotilla that's going, whether it's those activists from around the world on that flotilla, whether it's with folks like you who are raising the issue of Palestine in Australia, or whether it's the people on the ground in Palestine and in the Arab region who are resisting the Zionist entity. I think history will judge us all on where we stand on this key issue of the genocide that's being committed at the moment. So I want to begin by paying homage to all those folks around the world who have raised their voice for the people of Gaza. My best wishes to the participants of the flotilla, and my love and solidarity to the people of Gaza who are teaching us what it means to live in dignity when facing the worst forms of barbarism by an entity that has no regard for human life or basic decency. As we talk about disasters, I'm speaking right now from Pakistan, where we are facing one of the biggest climatic disasters of the last 100 years. Punjab, the province of Punjab in Pakistan and India have faced the worst floods ever recorded. Almost 2 million people in Pakistan alone have been displaced. When we take into account the amount of disease and destruction of farmland, which amounts to almost 1.3 million acres, the impact on the economy, on the people, will be immeasurable. Remember, this flood has cut across the international boundary between India and Pakistan, which means that climate disasters do not have much respect for man-made boundaries. And you should also remember that in May, Pakistan and India were about to go to war against each other. And today they are unable to give enough support, financial support to their own people who are in a desperate situation. So we have money for war, but we don't have enough money to help our people. But there's, of course, an international dimension to the climate disaster that we're seeing in Pakistan unfold at the moment. And that has to do with the fact that despite the fact that Pakistan has not even until today used its own fair share of carbon emissions, we and countries like Pakistan are the victims of a development model that first exploited us, and now we're facing the consequences, the worst consequences of climate change within our regions. This all stems from this longer history, the last 200, 300 years, of a particular development model created by capitalism, in which not only the working classes of the Western world were exploited, but also it led to this search for cheap resources, cheap land, and cheap labor across the world. And this is where modern imperialism arrived in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. And this is not simply a history of colonization. It is a history of erasure. It is a history of famines. It's a history of Holocaust. It's a history of genocide. It's a history in which just in our part of the world, in the subcontinent, trillions of dollars, there's one study that says $70 trillion in today's terms were siphoned off from India into the coffers in England. This is a development model that left millions of people in places like Bengal and elsewhere to the mercy of famines as these hoarders and profiteers from different parts of Europe created a monopoly over our agricultural produce, over our lands, over our labor. And what that does even today is that it created a history, a legacy of disposability of human beings. African bodies were disposable. Indigenous bodies were disposable. Colonized bodies were disposable. So the very history of capitalism, the history of modernity, is not only a history of denying people rights, it's actually also a history of denying the very humanity of people, of not recognizing, not registering, not even mourning the deaths of certain kinds of communities, certain kinds of people, certain kinds of races, genders, which is why many people from both in historical terms and in the contemporary moment, despite the fact that they've committed massive amounts of violence on the non-European world, they are not looked as villains in history in the same way as some other folks are. For example, the good man Winston Churchill, who during the Second World War supported the hoarding of grains in Bengal and elsewhere, and it led to one of the worst man-made famines in history. And one of his own officers, when he wrote to him saying, we need to stop this, too many people are dying, his response to his officer was, has Gandhi died? So the kind of callousness that we see, similarly even today, even from George Bush to liberal folks like Obama, the impunity with which they have destroyed entire societies and gotten away with it. Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Syria, and a number of other countries, even like Venezuela, Cuba, that have been sanctioned. There's an entire trail of destruction that these individuals have created. But this is not a problem of individuals or specific countries alone. This is a problem of a system that requires more and more access to cheap lands, to cheap labor, to cheap resources, just to maintain the treadmill of production. And this production, which is linked with fossil fuels, not only does it exploit our resources, not only does it make humanity disposable, it is also creating this incredible imbalance within our ecosystems all over the world. So all the technological fixes that certain people talk about when dealing with climate change, or when they talk about one policy or another policy, or one individual or another individual, this is fundamentally a flawed approach when the very logic of the system, just to maintain itself, it requires this excessive need for exploitation and destruction, which eventually enters the realm of imperialism. One other important thing that we have to look at in this particular world as we face this climate catastrophe is the ongoing threat of war. We know that while capitalism is unable to provide homes to working class people, good education, good healthcare, it has the capacity not to construct, but to destroy. And we in the third world have seen that over the last 40, 50 years, where the US, whichever country US imperialism has touched, has turned that place into an image of a ruin. So, this is almost a planet of ruins that's being created. I've already listed some of the countries: Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Syria. But that is not something that's an exception. At this point in history, this is what capitalism is offering. And just recently, the military budget of the US has gone over $1 trillion. Officially, it's about 800 billion, but unofficially, the figures are over 1 trillion. And they have 800 military bases around the world. Comrades, this is planning for a planetary scale war, an attempt to reverse any gains that have been made by countries, societies, organizations in the last 100 years since the start of the anti-colonial revolt. One of the big strategies that the US has over the last 30 years is to destroy any notion of state sovereignty in the third world, so that there is no capacity for third world countries to even negotiate and install leaders such as the puppets that they installed all over the world, including, unfortunately, in Palestine at the moment, who are unable to represent their people, unable to fight for their people. And this is a strategy of denying any form of sovereignty to the majority of people. And what the US is saying, the message it's giving to the world, that while it can no longer give you a New Deal or a Marshall Plan that can, even in a capitalist sense, create some kind of a development model. If it cannot give that, it can at least, why you should listen to the US is because it can destroy you. So it's a negative argument. It's an argument of survival. It is reducing international politics. It's reducing the very architecture of the global order to this choice of survival. And increasingly what we see within the core countries of the world, the rise of fascist movements, they represent this decaying capitalism, this decadent form of capitalism that can only survive if it has a counter-revolutionary impetus at its core, if it keeps scapegoating immigrants, if it keeps scapegoating the weak, if it keeps scapegoating countries in the global south. Fascism, war, climate catastrophe, and the disposability of human lives. This is the future that capitalism is offering us. The worst images of this future we can already see in Gaza. The genocide is not an isolated event. It is something that is revealing the core of our system. It is exposing the hypocrisy of our governments across the world. It is showing to what limits our system and our leaders and our institutions will go in order to wipe out any kind of an obstacle in their way. Therefore, I would like to end by making this appeal to all comrades. We, of course, like every generation, we also have our tasks cut out for us. We are part of history. We have a historic mission at this point in time when we're seeing that the system of the ruling classes is unleashing genocidal forms of violence on us. No amount of time we give to building an alternative is time wasted. It is the most key element of human existence at this point to develop our capacity to resist, to develop the organizational forms, to develop the intellectual forms, to develop the horizons that we need right now, the kind of solidarity networks that we need right now for building an alternative. Because the only way we can shift from this genocidal system to a system that's more humane is by acknowledging that the climate catastrophe and all the other catastrophes linked to it are being unleashed by capitalism. And the answer to this decaying, decadent, fascist, genocidal form of capitalism is eco-socialism, which respects the rights of ordinary people, of workers, of indigenous folks, of people in the third world countries, of women, of minorities across the world. That vision is in stark contrast to what is being offered by the ruling classes. And no one will fight for this vision, this alternative vision, but us. the ordinary people, the working class people all over the world. So I want to thank Green Left Weekly and Socialist Alliance, because you are building the basis for the kind of solidarity, global networks of solidarity that are required. I'm really happy we have comrades from Asia and elsewhere here. We don't get to meet many comrades in Pakistan or even have these conversations with them. You are building that basis. This is a historic mission that you are a part of, that we are a part of, and we don't have the option of losing, because the future of humanity, the future of our planet is at stake. So a lot to be done. Let's get on with it, and long live socialism, long live the people of Gaza, and long live everybody who is resisting fascism and genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ammar, and solidarity to you and comrades in Pakistan, and thank you for your solidarity. It was really great to hear from you, and we will have a chance to ask Ammar some questions a little bit later. But before we do that, I would like to introduce our second speaker for the night, Cyn Huang. Thank you, Cyn.
Cool. Well, first thing I'll say is that I'm incredibly giddy that I don't have to follow both Ammar and Sue, because that would be an impossible task. But in any case, hi everyone. It's so nice being with you guys here today. This conference is important for so many reasons that I could say, but I think we'll all feel it together this weekend. My name is Cyn. I'm a socialist student and labor activist from the United States. I'm organized with a group called the Democratic Socialists of America. It's the largest socialist organization in my country, as well as a Marxist tendency within it called Bread and Roses. And I know that the last thing people want to hear is yet another American, having something to say about world politics, especially when there are so many inspiring and urgent stories to tell from all over the world, including the protests happening in Indonesia right now, as well as the 300,000 strong pro-Palestine demo that took place here a few weeks ago. So, I apologize for taking up space, but yeah, congratulations, guys. Yeah. But it's important to say that the U.S., the determining factor behind the world situation is not all doom and gloom, even in the belly of the beast. There are social movements, there are political organizations, there are masses of ordinary people who are compelled to answer the call that brought us, all of us here together today. And the call that's being made, the questions that is being posed to us, not just to the activists in this conference hall, but to all of humanity, is simply put, ecosocialism or barbarism. And I agree with Chloe and the socialist luminaries like Rosa Luxemburg, who came before us. I agree with them that this is a really potent summary of our challenge today, which in some ways is quite hard for my generation to conceptualize, given that the world that we inherited has always been characterized by wars, by financial crisis, and social injustices of all sorts. The generation that's coming of age now began their conscious political lives with Trump in office, so it makes it a bit harder for us to appreciate the depth and singularity of the crisis that we're living through, a crisis that has economic, political, social, and now undeniable ecological dimensions. I'm going to speak about the U.S. as an example, since that's what I'm most familiar with, but the dynamics that apply to my country have played out again and again all over the world, and not as a coincidence. As for the economic component, the 2008 financial crisis ushered in the most recent crisis of capitalism. The entire global credit system came to a standstill, and the first response by capital was to bail out Wall Street, to have working people pay for the crisis by giving up their incomes, their social services, and their own homes and jobs, need be. The economic crisis remains unresolved today as the global economy and people's living conditions stagnate. And it's reinforced by a crisis of political leadership, which sees establishment parties, some center or center-left forces, others from more democratic or militant social democratic origins. These groups are taking turns at implementing austerity, either because they're pessimistic about our ability to confront the crisis, or because they're instruments of capital themselves. And this ultimately paves the way for the growth of the far right, which preys viciously on people's real insecurities. In the United States, what this looks like is the Democratic and Republican Party duopoly. Both are parties of capital, one the historic preference of financiers and tech CEOs, the other the typical home of the fossil fuel industry. In the wake of Trump's re-election, there was a lot of ruminations about how we could let this happen again. Mainstream media and well-meaning liberals, of course, spilled much ink over the idea that Kamala Harris, Joe Biden's successor, could have run a more savvy campaign or taken more campaign inspiration from popular figures like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The technical deficiencies of the Democratic Party are real, but as socialists, we know that the overwhelming reason behind Trump's victory, the overwhelming reason for the defection of young people, of immigrant communities, of working class communities from the so-called opposition party, the Democrats, is because ordinary people's lives have just been utterly miserable under Democratic governance as well. In the months leading up to the election, under Joe Biden administration, families dealt with skyrocketing food and housing prices. Under Democrats and Republicans alike, it's just a normal fact of life that you have to run a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis to decide whether or not you go to the doctor. Joe Biden himself greenlighted the genocide in Palestine and helped construct the modern carceral state as we know it. And you compound these realities with the fact that even if Kamala Harris adopted, Bernie-style social democratic demands in the 11th hour, that you simply cannot undo the Democratic Party's track record of working in tandem with the Republicans for decades to implement neoliberalism and systematically degrade people's lives and rights all over the world. So neoliberal parties, including those that wrap themselves in a rainbow flag, have created tremendous space for the far right to step in. In fact, it has been the far right that has spoken the loudest and most directly to people's insecurities around the world, whether it be Trump in the United States, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Netanyahu, Malay, the AfD in Germany, and not just institutional figures, but also grassroots movements like the Pentecostal churches in Brazil or March for Australia, the nationalist, racist, anti-immigrant movement that has resurfaced here last week. And so long there is no mass left-wing alternative to establishment forces, the far right will be a persistent and strengthening pull in society, a pull of force that will turbocharge the long-standing social crises of capitalism. Trump in his re-election campaign, for instance, correctly diagnosed that the American electorate that is sick of wars, is sick of stagnant wages and politicians who represent the status quo, and he built his campaign on the most tempting deceptions that he would stop the war in Ukraine, that he would get Israel to commit to a ceasefire, that he would put money back in the pockets of American workers. But what do we see today? We see the Israeli military's takeover of Gaza City, Trump's naked extortion of Ukraine, the biggest wealth transfer from the American working class to the rich through Trump's big, beautiful bill, a tariff war that has plunged the international working class into economic misery, and the demonization of immigrants and Muslims for all the problems that the ruling class has created. And last but not least, we also have the ecological crisis, which is a new factor compared to previous moments of global turmoil. And in contrast, like Chloe said, to those who speak of the ecological crisis as a threat, we eco-socialists say it is not a threat. It's already here, devastating communities and putting an expiration date on humanity through more frequent and destructive natural disasters, through unprecedented heat waves, the exhaustion and commodification of our limited natural resources, and all of these environmental aspects being deeply intertwined with socio-political disputes over indigenous rights, land sovereignty, public utilities, war, and immigration. So the crisis of capitalism we're living through is deep and complex. From the capitalist perspective, it is a crisis that is increasingly difficult to resolve within the norms of bourgeois democracy. That's why we see the international rules-based order that the US helped construct in the post-war period collapsing, because it no longer guarantees the American ruling class its dominance over the world, especially against the rise of China, which the US so heavily depends on for military, for technological, and basic consumer provisions. And this is why figures like Trump are making an authoritarian neo-fascist turn, using the power of the American state to reorganize the global economy, reorganize geopolitical alliances, and break the backbone of any social movement that can stand in his way. And so this is where eco-socialism or barbarism comes back in, because the choice that we face is not between a better or worse capitalism, the bourgeois democratic status quo, that we were used to, or the more illiberal authoritarian version being constructed by figures like Trump right now. To put it another way, the former system, bourgeois democracy plus neoliberalism, gave birth to the latter, and the latter, neo-fascism, is putting us in a death spiral. The choice before us, then, is between a different mode of production, a new solidaristic and radically democratic way of living, of relating to each other and to nature, or death and destruction. And given the current balance of power in society, it's really easy to let, the state of the world paralyze us. That's why we, as radicals, have to think very intentionally about how to help ourselves be moved by the possibilities, which is one of the reasons why, this conference is so important. And fortunately, though humanity has not yet risen to the level of the challenge, there are still countless possibilities, countless examples of people who feel the urgency of the moment and are stepping up to answer the call. And in particular, I'm thinking about the Freedom Flotilla, which at the beginning of this month has set sail with activists from 44 different countries to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza. In the process of sailing to Gaza, they've polarized the world against Israel and helped cohere the international movement in solidarity with Palestine. Another bright spot in the past few years has been the dozens of youth-led rebellions or resistance movements with students and youth playing a huge, critical part, such as the anti-austerity or anti-genocide, anti-establishment fights we're seeing in Serbia, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and the US, to name a few. These mobilizations continue in the tradition of youth indignation, like seen in the Arab Spring, the Occupy Wall Street, the Indignados movement of the last decade, but they've also organized the indignation in new political forms. For instance, the youth in the US today, as compared to the last decade, tend to be more organized, less suspicious, of organization. They're more connected with social movements, the labor movement in particular, and are aided by the existence of groups like the Democratic Socialists of America, which plants the flag for socialism in a way and at a scale that hasn't been seen in American society for the past few decades. There are a lot of other promising developments as well. This could easily become a laundry list. There's the sector represented by Greta Thunberg, who stand in radical contrast to liberal environmentalists and are unabashedly linking the battle against climate change to the defense of Palestinians. The seemingly inexhaustible demonstrations happening more or less every week here and in London since October 7th. The new party being formed in the UK, Black Lives Matter, a growing union reform movement in the US that's calling for more democratic, militant, and solidaristic unions. Last but not least, Saram Mamdani, a young progressive Muslim immigrant who is the front runner for the New York City mayoral race. He's running on a real working class program of free, fast and free buses, free childcare, and freezing the rent, all paid for by taxing the rich. And behind him, he's powered by an incredibly diverse movement of labor unions, pro-Palestine activists, different New York City ethnic communities, and DSA as well, the main mobilizational force behind his campaign. And what all or many of these things have in common is that they are racially and ethnically diverse. They're allied with the most pressing anti-imperialist struggle of our time, the defense of the Palestinian people. They are politically open in the sense that most of these movements are, kind of disconnected from historical traditions, but simultaneously that makes them very ecumenical, non-dogmatic, open to new ideas and sources of inspiration. And at their forefront is the youth, the generation of people who are not just betting on a better future, but betting on having a future at all, as billionaires, hurtle us towards the end of the world and ecological destruction. A big question for these people, all these groups I just mentioned, is where will they be in 5 to 10 years? Are they still going to be organized? Are their struggles going to be more connected, or are they going to work parallel to each other like passing ships in the night? Is eco-socialism going to be their horizon, or merely opposition to the status quo? The answers to those questions are up to us. And when I say up to us, I don't just mean in a nice, warm way, like just, so I can have a nice thing to say to a room full of people. I mean it in the actually purposeful sense of having the ability to shape the answers to those questions. And I think the Saram Mamdani movement in New York City is a good case study in miniature. For context, small parts of the left around the world have already, written the movement off in some ways. They say it's inevitable that Zoran will sell out. He's not ideological enough. His campaign is too focused on him as an individual. The base is under-organized. There are other million problems, so it's bound to backfire. Let's not, dirty ourselves in the process. And I think this is an incredibly cynical and irresponsible view to have. To be clear, all the challenges and risks people cite are completely real. Zoran's base is under-organized. He's already facing capitalist retaliation in the forms of co-optation as well as direct attacks, and it's only going to amplify once he gets in office. Nevertheless, there are hundreds of thousands of people inspired by his campaign, and if you go talk to them, it's clear that they're not just waiting for a savior. These are ordinary people seeking new ideas and looking for ways to fight and transform their lives as they know it. And we on the left can go out and meet this demand by helping deepen and politicize campaigns like his. We can win people to class politics, a class approach to changing the world, not just class demands like having free public services. And we can do this by, for example, in New York, by not only building an army of door-knocking foot soldiers, but holding political education meetings about how New York City became unaffordable, building independent mobilizations for different planks of his platform, connecting new Zoran activists with tenants unions, labor unions, and DSA. We can help people understand and exercise their own power, not just in the context of the Zoran campaign, but also alongside the mass opposition that has been developing to Trump internationally and domestically through the past couple months, through initiatives like protests at Democratic and Republican town halls, mass street mobilizations, on a monthly basis around symbolic days called Hands Off and No Kings, through union-led initiatives around May Day, and a call for a general strike on May Day in 2028. The odds are certainly against us, but the same has been true for all other, movements for transformative change. And if we're going to speak the language of guarantees, I'll put it this way. I don't know of a single example where betting on solidarity, on grassroots mobilization, and the ability of working people to come together to solve their own problems has not put us in a better position to bring about a better world. So that's very much the spirit I'll be taking into the conference this weekend. It's my first time here in Australia, and the first time I'll be getting to meet so many comrades from the Indo-Pacific region, a place where the U.S. sorely lacks connections, understanding, and solidarity. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all your experiences and using this conference as a launch pad to building an even stronger international working class movement going forward. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Cyn. That was really fascinating, and I'm sure you've inspired a lot of questions in people. In particular, how do we organize better? How do we access our collective power to build left-wing alternatives? I'd like to introduce our third and last speaker, Sue Bolton. Thank you, Sue.
Hi, comrades. I'd like to start by paying my respects to the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri Wurrung, who are the traditional owners of this area, as well as all First Nations people here today. And I'd also like to recognise that the southeast of this continent suffered the initial brunt of the colonial genocide, so that only 3 Wurundjeri clans survived, because 9 men fenced off the area and forced the Wurundjeri out of their hunting grounds and sort of basically starved a lot of Wurundjeri to death, and then the Wurundjeri were turned into refugees in their own land. And there's way more to the whole story than that. But there was also resistance, and I'd like to pay my respects to all the First Nations warriors of the past and the current day. So the title of the conference, Ecosocialism or Barbarism. Well, as the other speakers, Cyn and Ammar Ali, have pointed out, we're witnessing barbarism as we speak tonight. The barbarism that's happening in Gaza. Barbarism that's being funded and supported by Western imperialism, with weapons provided by Western imperialism, and the perpetuation of the pretense that nothing is happening. The Australian government, which is also a supposed Social Democratic Party-led government, the Labor Party, wouldn't even utter the word ceasefire until months after it was clear that Israel was committing genocide. And the Conservatives, the Liberal Party, still doesn't even call for a ceasefire now. And thanks to all the brave journalists who got photos out of the atrocities over the last almost 2 years, including of the malnourished babies and children with bones sticking out. And shamefully, most of those journalists have been murdered by Israel. And finally, there's some acknowledgement that there's a famine going on in Gaza. But why should that be a surprise? As soon as Israel announced in 2023 they were cutting off all food, water, medical supplies, fuel for cooking, etc., as soon as they announced that, you knew what was going to happen unless we implemented sanctions to force Israel to stop the genocide. So it's not a surprise. And if we'd had sanctions on Israel back in 2023, we could have saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of Gazan people, and even more hundreds of thousands of Gazan people who've got serious disabilities, missing arms, legs, etc. So, we know this is a totally human-made catastrophe. But on the other hand, we've also seen the pro-Palestine movement. And I think this is what the other speakers have talked about, the two sides of the coin, what the ruling class, what the capitalist system is bringing us, but also the resistance. So the mass pro-Palestine movement could always see the double standards. There were instant sanctions against Russia, wide-ranging sanctions after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and zero sanctions against Israel. The Australian government slithered through the last federal election campaign by saying, oh, it's sad what's happening in Gaza, but Australia can't do anything because we're not a major player. And so they've been getting away with this by pretending that they're not selling critical weapons parts to Israel for its F-35 bombers. And the movement has known about this. We've been blowing the whistle on this, but the government keeps trying to find ways of pretending it's not collaborating militarily with Israel. There are extensive military contracts by various Australian governments and universities with Israeli weapons companies, and Australia is stepping up its weapons manufacturing. If Australia stopped producing parts for F-35 bombers, the supply system for F-35 bombers would come to a halt because it's a just-in-time manufacturing system, and Israel is going through so many parts with these F-35 bombers that any one or small group of countries could stop this program in its tracks. The positive thing about the horrific situation is the development of the massive global pro-Palestine movement. This movement has had to fight to expose Australian weapons links with Israel. It had to put pressure on so-called human rights NGOs that didn't want to condemn the genocide and Israeli atrocities. We've had to win the right to be able to show our solidarity with Palestine, and of course there's countless examples of people fighting in their workplaces and using whatever platform they can to win this right. That we've had to fight against the IHRA definition, which is used to describe pro-Palestinian sentiment as being anti-Semitic. We've had to educate people on the difference between Zionism and Judaism, and there's been the development of the strong alliance between Palestinians and Jews. The extraordinary weekly pro-Palestine protests, which I've never seen in my life in Australia. Every time in Australia that the left gets excited about a new movement and calls for weekly protests, it's usually the recipe for the end of the movement because people can't keep up the protests every week. But we have had these protests every week for almost 2 years, and not just once a week, many days a week. And those protests are really important, not only to the people who come, but also people who might be watching and supporting, because it gives them confidence to also take a stand in whatever forum they can make a stand in. The horrors of what Israel is doing in the absence of action by the Australian government has brought thousands of new people into political activity for the first time. And there's countless stories, and I'm sure for many countries, of people who've never done anything political before who suddenly take spontaneous political action outside their local MP's office or whatever, or in their union or wherever. But the outcome in Gaza, whether or not Israel is forced to pay for its crimes, will have an impact on the whole world. And I know there's a lot of other struggles happening in the world, not only in Palestine, but the outcome of this struggle will have an impact on everybody. The deliberate genocide against Gaza is the major crime of the 21st century, just like the Nazi Holocaust. Why won't the US and its allies stop supporting Israel? Every criticism of Israel by Western governments has had to be squeezed out of them by the mass movement. The pro-Palestine movement is more politically conscious than the Palestine movement, at least in Australia I'm talking about, than it was in the past. In the past, a lot of Palestine solidarity activists tried to explain why Australia wouldn't budge on its support for Israel during other atrocities in the past by thinking it was just pressured by the Zionist lobby. And of course that's true. The Zionist lobby is a powerful lobby and does have a big impact. But that's not the full story, and probably not the main story. Many in the movement now, seeing this incredible genocide, are open now to an anti-capitalist argument. Israel plays a critical role for US imperialism in controlling the Middle East for US interests. Israel has always been crucial for the US, and beyond supporting US interests in the Middle East, the US has also relied on Israel to arm military dictatorships when the US Congress has blocked military spending for, brutal dictatorships in Latin America. The US has relied on Israel as a backdoor way of militarily aiding all sorts of countries, from Latin American dictatorships to the brutal Sri Lankan regime that carried out genocide against the Tamils, the Burmese military, the Suharto regime, have all been recipients of Israeli military aid, and many more. So Israel is absolutely central for the US. That's why it is so hard for our movement to break that support. And Australia is also part of that US imperialist system. We've witnessed the liberal institutions of capitalism, which is supposedly looking after human rights, to have mostly turned a blind eye to the genocide. Some are making stands now, but there's had to be immense pressure from the pro-Palestine movement to force some of these institutions that are supposedly progressive to condemn Israel, when they would have had no worries about condemning any other country for even a minute amount of what Israel has done. And then while the genocide in Gaza is happening, the military build-up against China is increasing at a rapid pace in the Asia-Pacific, and climate change is gathering pace. War exacerbates climate change, both with the emissions that are produced by the bombs, but also the sucking up of the world's resources. How many resources are being just blown up by Israel and all of the other wars across the world, but especially Israel in Gaza? The Iraq War also, where they, in the early 2000s, when they left all these oil wells burning for months and months and months and possibly years. So this military machine is preventing us from being able to solve the climate crisis. And, you know, of course, has been pointed out, the floods and fires and tornadoes and storms, parts of the world are becoming unlivable now and will become much more unlivable in the future. And the climate wars have not stopped. And as others have pointed out, the governments are still reliant on market mechanisms which are not going to solve the climate crisis. In the Pacific region, where Australia plays the role that the US is playing around the world, Australia is the big bully in the Pacific, bullying and trying to boss around all the small countries in the Pacific. Australia has, well, actually since the Labor Party was elected, because the Liberal Party government, the previous one, alienated so many of the Pacific Island nations. So the Labor government has swooped in on behalf of capitalism to offer all of these you know, aid deals in return for no security pacts, no relationship with China. Even Australia funded an AFL team, footy team in Papua New Guinea on the basis that PNG not have any relationship with China. Now we're seeing the far right, and I'd agree with a lot of the points that Cyn has made about the far right that's developed in Australia. It's not a new phenomenon. But what is new is the level of confidence that the Nazi wing of the far right is showing. But it's really not just the Nazis, like the rallies that happened last Sunday throughout Australia. You know, it's not just that we need to oppose the Nazis, we need to oppose racism, because racism also kills. We've seen pogroms in Australia in the past, against Aboriginal people, against Chinese people, against migrants, which result in murders and deaths and lynchings. So we have to, you know, try and build a united front against racism. And it's the racist movement that the Nazis are trying to take advantage of to really grow. But both a big racist movement as well as the Nazi movement are both dangerous. But where has this come from? It's come from really the mainstream right, both the impacts of neoliberalism, privatisation, you know, where both Liberal and Labor in Australia have privatised almost everything that moves. What they're trying to do now is destroy public housing and follow the British example. The Liberal Party leader ran an election campaign at the beginning of this year saying that migrants caused the housing crisis. Well, we had the great experiment of COVID when no migrants were allowed into the country, no international students. If it was true that migrants caused the housing crisis, then you'd expect that housing would have been dirt cheap in Australia during COVID. It wasn't. Anyone paying rent or mortgage or however you get your housing would know that it was very expensive. We've had mainstream organisations like the Right Wing Institute, the IPA, spreading fake immigration figures to create panic of being overwhelmed. But also on the eve of the racist protests, the Australian government has rammed through legislation which will potentially affect up to 80,000 people, not immediately, but now and in the future, to be able to deport migrants to Nauru. That will include some refugees. They're using the poor status of Nauru, which was destroyed by British mining, so that you really can't grow anything on Nauru. The island was absolutely destroyed by British mining companies. And so they're dependent on countries like Australia to give them money. And in this case, Australia's giving them money for taking refugees and migrants. Now, this particular grouping of people has been incredibly demonised by the current Labor government and the Liberal Party opposition. Some of the people have done jail time for particular crimes, but at the end of their jail time, they were put into indefinite detention There was a High Court decision that forced them to be released, and then the government has demonised these people as being the biggest, the biggest threat, violent people. I mean, some people haven't even committed any crimes, etc., at all. But it's really they potentially will be in Nauru for 30 years if they get away with this. So Australia has been the trailblazer for all the wrong reasons. It sees its anti-refugee policy is seen as an example by Trump and by right-wing governments in Europe. It pioneered offshore detention in island countries and other countries, and it introduced Operation Sovereign Borders to turn boatloads of refugees back in the middle of the ocean. So what we can see, I'm finishing up just now, what we can see is the interconnectedness of the world. The far right, both mainstream right and the Nazis, are collaborating across the globe. And we need to collaborate and spread collaboration and solidarity across the globe in the revolutionary anti-capitalist movement. But it's also important that we not only have developed and support spontaneous struggles against the nasties and horrific things that capitalism is bringing us, but we also have to create ongoing revolutionary organisations, because we saw the uprisings throughout the Arab world in 2011, and basically through various means some dictatorships got back into power. Countries like US and Saudi Arabia and others managed to divert these elements of revolutionary movements. So this weekend we're privileged to have so many socialist activists from around the world. It's a shame Ammar Ali won't be with us, because it would be great to, have some informal chats with you about politics and collaboration and activities and so forth. But having so many of the international activists here in person is a huge opportunity for us. It's an opportunity to swap perspectives, analyses, organising experiences, as well as collaborating on common projects, swapping stories of victories and defeats. And hopefully maybe next year we can start to have some comrades from some of the countries in Africa. I'm aware that there's a huge youth uprising happening in Kenya at the moment, and the formation of the Kenyan Left Alliance is one example of many struggles happening in Africa. Australia is an imperialist power in this region, which makes it extra important for revolutionaries across the Asia-Pacific to collaborate, and for activists in Australia to be aware of the struggles, and for us to build stronger networks across the region. And it'll be a great conference, comrades, and look forward to all the discussions with everybody.
Thank you, Sue. I just want to quickly remind people that before we go into discussion, for anyone who bought a ticket for this conference and would like to attend more of the conference, you can upgrade your ticket at the registration desk. And there is also a contact sheet going around. Got it? Yeah, thank you. You can get the activist calendar, which is a really good, it's a service that we provide to the left here in NAM, and yeah, we promote a lot of the left-wing events and protests. So yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one to get in your email. All right, we're going to go into discussion, open it up for discussion now. I will take a list of those who would like to ask the speakers a question. So please indicate to me by raising your hand. I'll allow the speakers to respond after 3 people have contributed. And just to be aware, each question, please keep it no longer than 1 to 2 minutes, because Ali has Ammar Ali Jan left, or is he still here? Is he still here? Oh, he had to go.
He's had to go.
He's had to go. Apologies. Yeah. Okay. Well, then you can. We've got two wonderful speakers still here, so I'll take 3 people, and then we will go to the speakers. And just to facilitate a fair, inclusive discussions, I will inform you when your 2 minutes is up. This session is being live streamed, so please be aware if you are asking a question or making a point for discussion that it will be filmed and will eventually go onto YouTube. Okay, did anyone want to ask a question? Please raise your hand and I'll take a call list.
Can you use one of the radio mics? Can you just turn on the button at the top?
Did anyone want to ask a question? Got 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Is it on? Just make sure it's on, please.
I don't think they're on.
You hold the top button down for a few seconds, and then the green light comes on, and they're on.
Hi, Cyn and Stu. My name's Susan, and I'm here from the Gold Coast in Queensland, and we're very much looking forward to you visiting us after the conference. So I don't want to make a statement. I really want to ask a question. I suppose for those of us who've been watching US politics quite a bit, the other aspect of developments there has been Trump's mobilisation of the National Guard and the takeovers of Washington DC and threats to take over Chicago and the cities that, really, people are talking about fascism and, the sort of, rise in authoritarianism, I guess, however you want to label it, but it's very disturbing. And I guess the other aspect that you don't hear about a lot in the Australian mainstream media is the sort of resistance going on the ground, grassroots resistance to the deportations and ICE raids going on. So it'd just be really great to get a bit more of a flavour of that, level of organisation going on at the grassroots in communities against Trump's agenda. Thanks.
Can I have that person with the mask? And I think Mark's at the back there.
Hi. So, as well as the myriad of crises we are facing in the year 2025, another one, one of the crises going on is we have a public health crisis. We are 5.5 years into the COVID pandemic. 36 million people worldwide are dead from COVID. 400 million people, or 5% of the world's population, have long COVID, including me. But out of this utter catastrophe, heroically, politically organised long COVID communities have got together and organised protests and other political activity in Australia, in the US, in Germany, and probably other places that I'm not aware of. And I think I can speak on behalf of many, many people in these long COVID communities, and when I say, we encourage the political left to engage with us in our movement. And my question to the speakers is, what is your party doing in solidarity with the long COVID community and our struggle for healthcare and other things? If you're not doing much, are you willing to engage? And will there be COVID safety precautions in place for this conference? I tried to ask this question a few times in the lead up to this, and I didn't get an answer. I'd appreciate an answer now. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go to Mark's next, and then we'll throw it back to the speakers. Thanks, Mark's.
Good evening, and thank you to our speakers. Questions I'll be asking is for our comrade from the United States, and please don't treat this as divisive questions. This is coming from a comradely place. And I understand a lot of the criticisms and reservations of running a candidate under the Democratic Party. And I do understand that there's a lot of cynicism about that. But then I ask this question every time we get a member of DSA in our forums. So what are there any steps taken for the DSA to finally put forward a party of your own instead of running under the umbrella of the Democratic Party again and again? The criticism that the broader left has for the likes of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not that they got co-opted, because of the system that Democrats run is once you're in office, half of the tenure you're there, you're just campaigning to get reelected. So that's how that system works, even if you're not in there or you started like from a progressive standpoint. So my question is, what's the DSA like internal meetings about finally putting forward your own party, and why is there a bigger faction that always campaigns to run under the Democrats? Just give us what's the discussions going on in the DSA about that, because the criticisms from the left about your candidates being co-opted is not coming from a place of just cynicism or ignorance. Thank you.
Thanks, Marx. And Jono, can you just take this mic instead? Because I think it's working a little bit better than that one. Oh, actually, no, wait, we need the speakers to use it. Pardon me. We need the speakers to use it. So maybe, could I ask Cyn to respond to a few of the questions?
Sure.
First? Yeah, and then
Sorry, I might be a bit rambly, and some of these answers are a bit jumbled, but I'll try to take them in order, maybe the first and the third first. So the first question was about Trump's mobilization of the National Guard. So just for context, some of the most recent developments in the construction of Trump's fascist police state is that he has federalized the Washington, D.C. police force and called in the National Guard from several states to patrol D.C., kind of manufacturing a crisis. He's alleging that there are mobs of wild youth, drug cartels that have created a state of anarchy in D.C., and that this gives him emergency powers to, not just take control of the D.C. police force, but turn the military on the U.S.'s own citizens. And the severity of this is really hard to overstate, not just because it's prohibited constitutionally, and there are various legal checks and balances, especially to prevent the use of the military force domestically. Clearly, with respect to the police force, or even things like the international trade war, these legal checks and balances have not posed much resistance at all. And effects of it, I think, are still playing out. Trump has already threatened to stick the National Guard too on other Democratic strongholds across the country, including Chicago, Baltimore, potentially where I live, in Oakland as well. And this is a very alarming development, and one aspect, I think, of Trump's attempt to change the political order. He's both trying to build his police state, but he's also taking the path of institutional erosion for anybody who's disagreeing with him, like, for example, labor statisticians who say that employment is down, or people who are saying that his policies are destroying the environment. He has shown no fear in sacking them and replacing them with yes men. And so this is a multi-pronged strategy that we have to be on guard against. As for the state of the resistance, I think you mentioned in your comment that maybe people are not registering that what we're seeing in front of us is some kind of neo-fascism. I think there's a lot of truth to that, actually, because a lot of people in my generation have never grown up under authoritarian government before, so it's hard to recognize, and maybe there's a conceptual error right now. I think I've heard a lot of socialists say that, defending democracy is something that liberals do, but socialists do something distinct. But actually, socialists are the most vigorous defenders of democracy and a real robust sense of democracy. And sometimes, in the way that this plays out, is that so far there have been mass mobilizations in our country around a whole host of issues. For example, the anti-ICE, anti-immigration and customs enforcement protests emerging out of LA, a really diverse immigrant community. There have been days of mobilization, like on this really symbolic day called No Kings, Trump's birthday, where he did a whole military parade over Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, I think maybe some sometimes DSA has not taken the most proactive relationship to really shape these processes, kind of hesitant to get involved because maybe they're dominated by liberal forces, or, all these criticisms of the movement that it's too old, too disconnected from the anti-genocide student wing, from the labor movement. A lot of these criticisms are true, but I don't think amount to any kind of reason that the left should not proactively take place in these mobilizations and try to shape the politics of what's going on. But as of now, in terms of how to fight the National Guard, I think the methods that are being developed are the ones at DC and LA right now, and we're trying to build networks of resistance to do a lot of political education about what's happening in these places, how places like Chicago, Oakland can prepare. We're putting pressure on Democratic politicians to not work or cooperate with Trump's demands. But I think, there's a lot of improvement to be made. And in terms of, I think the last question, which is very well taken. I always appreciate this because it's actually a really great opportunity to reflect on how the American left has developed. So the question was about DSA's relationship to the Democratic Party, and I think maybe one place to start is to make a distinction between the Democratic Socialists of America and its new iteration that's kind of started off the backs of Trump's first election and the Bernie campaign versus the pre-2016 DSA. The pre-2016 DSA, it wasn't even a question about a debate about what our relationship to the Democratic Party is. It was summarized in the slogan, we're the left wing of the possible. We just try to reform the Democratic Party in a better direction. I think DSA, its political ideas, its social composition completely transformed in 2016. And now the median age has dropped from 80 to 30 or something. And also, the political experiences of the group are much different. And from the beginning of DSA's revitalization, this has been a very vexed question for us. I think the discourse has evolved in really important ways. Before, I think more towards the initial part of the revitalization, our ideas were still really abstract. There were groups like my own tendency calling for an independent workers' party as a horizon, but there were really no concrete developments that would help us theorize about how we would get there. I think today, it's kind of, I wouldn't say taken for granted in the organization, but for the last couple conventions, it's been an aspiration of DSA to form an independent workers' party, and this is really important because, like you said, the Democratic Party is fundamentally a party of capital. Working people don't control the program, don't control who we run as a candidate. The Democratic Party doesn't act like a real working class party that would organize members, to fight important struggles. And so increasingly, we've waged this, propaganda battle. And it's an stated intention of the organization to bring about a new working class political party. This is a stance affirmed in 2 conventions now. But I think the devil's in the details of how to get there. There are a lot of tendencies that promote this idea, but there are differences over what kind of timeline we would expect a break from the Democrats, what kind of social forces would be brought together, which unions, what kind of role would DSA play, what role do social movements play, what kind of program would cohere them. And so there are a lot of technicalities and these political ideas to work out, but increasingly, I think DSA has grown to now 80,000 members. Our members are also rooted across a diverse range of social movements, across different campuses, across the labor movement, and healthcare, education, logistics, and whatnot. And our experience fighting to transform these spaces and also to politicize them is giving us more concrete, I think, data to figure out how to, move DSA in that direction. And one really exciting development from our most recent convention at the beginning of August was that there was this cross-organizational political exchange. So it completely broke precedent with how DSA conventions work in the past. This was an event that gathered international parties, social movements, different labor unions across the American political context, but all over the world to discuss 2 fundamental questions. What's our orientation to the call made by the UAW, the United Auto Workers president, to build a general strike for May Day 2028, and how does your organization feel about building an alternative to the Democrats? And for a first meeting of its kind, it didn't get too far, as you would expect. It was more so like a sales pitch from every organization, but it was a very important step because it demonstrated the breadth of DSA's of connections. And if there are serious political people thinking about how to connect these different possibilities, like for example, in my state, I'm thinking about how to align different unions' contract expirations, how to get different unions to support the same anti-capitalist political candidates. I think there's a lot of room to build there, but we got to think in a serious way about it. So I think it's improved. Long story short, it's improved, but there are a lot of details to work out still.
This
Oh, okay, all right.
Sorry about that, Cyn. The mic was a little bit. And just so people, if people did have a question for Ammar, you can save it for when he speaks at the next session. I'll hand it over to Sue.
There's really just one question for me, which was from Farida about COVID safety practices. I think really for this conference, we just really pursued, the question of having face masks available for people. I mean, we are in solidarity with people with long COVID, but it's, I guess we sort of discuss COVID safety measures with each particular conference that we organise. I don't think there's anything more that I can say other than that. But certainly I know that I've also been involved in campaigns where there've been issues, like from a disability rights point of view, where also it's also difficult for people to lip read when people have got face masks on. So it's, there are difficulties all around, but I think, there will be particular conferences or meetings or gatherings where we might have more stringent COVID safety measures than others. So I think that's really all, and it's just an open discussion ongoing, so it's not final.
Thanks, Sue. We have time for maybe one more round of questions. So did anyone else want to ask a question? I see one hand going up. I remember another hand before, and I can't remember where it was. Pardon me.
This one at the back.
Okay, so we'll take Merri down the back. Is there anyone else that wanted to ask the speakers a question? Yep, that comrade over there. Okay, so Merri, take it away.
Thanks. So my name is Merri. So just in the last day or two, I think, the US engaged in another extrajudicial killing of 11 people when they bombed or attacked in some way the boat from Venezuela. I'm just wondering if there's more information about that, and if Trump is willing to attack his own people because he's accused them of being drug smugglers in order to be able to attack Venezuela, or who are these people that have been murdered? And a quick second question, the victims of the Epstein scandal, are they being supported by the DSA or by women's groups? It seems the news over here just focuses on lawyers speaking on their behalf, but I wonder if there's some sort of grassroots support for those people as well, for those women.
Yes, sorry, I thought you come back. We'll actually take four because I did forget you. The person at the back, please come right here.
Hello, just a question there for the gentleman from the DSA. Just regarding Zoran, sorry to put you on the spot a bit here, and I'm certainly not being combative, but I guess this is the right forum for it, right? So Zoran has basically supported a two-state solution. He said Israel has a right to exist. That would be, in essence, liberal Zionism. So I'm just wondering how you sort of reconcile that with, I guess, the other statements that you're making, which were more revolutionary as opposed to just sort of Democratic Party entryism. Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat that second question?
I was just saying, like, sort of how do you reconcile the stuff that is more revolutionary and that I would agree with Zoran, who seems to be more like a sort of like doing entryism for the Democratic Party again. Thank you, and sorry for being annoying.
Thank you. So we had that comrade over there with their hand up. But you need to like put your hand up, wave it maybe so I can see you. And then lastly we will take breaking the rules here.
Hi panel, thanks. You can see recently the riot in Jakarta, we didn't seem to have much interest in it. It was a big thing. Uber driver was killed while delivering food. The establishment want to increase personal allowance for MPs. Now, Prabowo said that he'll do something, but isn't the Center for Democracy, the American CIA, has a hand in it? Are we then doing anything about it, or are we having any whatever program or protest about it?
Thank you. Do we pass the mic this way, please?
To make a discussion as short, I have also a short question. So I have a quick question about the movement against oligarchy in US. Actually, the combination of capitalists and establishment is composed of the oligarch, as you know. So I was so impressed with the current movement in US against the oligarchy, which is describing what is the root force of the current society. So my question is, how can you describe the anti-oligarchy movement in US? Yeah, as I mentioned before, the John Mandani would be a typical example of instance of the movement, I think so. So one thing, yeah, I'd like to mention is that Australia is not republic yet. However, we can get some inspiration from the movement in US.
Thank you for your questions. I'm going to hand it to, is it okay if I pass it to you? Yeah. No, I would like Cyn to maybe come up, or if you'd like to maybe respond to some of those questions, and then maybe Sue afterwards.
Yeah, sorry, I might have lost some of the questions in the detail. As for the first question about updates about the extrajudicial killing, I think this was also when I was on a 15-hour plane here, so I'm not as up to date about it. I'm sorry about that. To take the second question, I think there's an important clarification that needs to be made. The comrade in the back said Zoran has pledged support for a two-state solution. I think it's a little bit more subtle than that. He says that Israel has the right to exist as a pluralistic state with equal rights for all, so not, an ethno-nationalist state, which is kind of, a fundamental contradiction in terms with the basic premise of Israel, which is founded on apartheid, genocide, systematic dehumanization of Palestinians. And, this is, I think, a clever move that he has made on his part. It's not exactly the thing that I would say if I was running for mayor, but it's understandably rational why he chose this position. As for the question, does Zoran, running for mayor or, fundamentally advance the struggle for Palestinian rights? I absolutely think so. He's given the movement a huge platform. If he were to become the mayor, you can imagine his relationship with the police force. It would still be tortured, but I don't think he would be sticking, the police force on pro-Palestinian student protesters at Columbia, NYU, the city colleges of New York. And so this relates to the question about how do we think about the contradictions posed by his campaign. They're very real. You're right that he's kind of positioning himself as the new face of the Democratic Party. That's a strategic horizon I completely wouldn't agree with. But, that in itself doesn't settle the question of should we relate to the campaign or not. The fundamental questions that I'm asking myself, at least, in relationship to the Zoran campaign, is does him running give us a better chance, does Zoran hacking the Democratic Party ballot line give us a better chance of speaking to millions of people, of educating them about the class nature of society, of bringing them into organization, and also, contesting the battle of ideas about what the Democratic Party represents? Invariably so. He's not going to go the distance himself, and there have been people before him, like Bernie Sanders, that didn't go the distance either. I think we should totally leave ourselves the flexibility and the space to critique these figures. It's very disheartening for me to see AOC, who kind of inaugurated my political career, start her career staging protests outside of Nancy Pelosi's office and increasingly becoming, co-opted by the Democratic Party apparatus. There's no surprise about why this is happening, why most, left figures are just nice left personalities personalities as opposed to tribunes for a collective project. But still, just like with Bernie, just like with AOC, even though they themselves are not perfect, they create a huge opportunity for socialists with a from-below perspective to jump in the fold and to meet people and to give people a different set of ideas and a different set of solutions. Sometimes Zoran, AOC, Bernie would not, do those things themselves. I would like to have politicians and, collective tribunes that do that. To the extent that Zoran does, is also, a reflection that he's the product of collective organization. He cut his teeth building a Students for Justice Palestine chapter at Bolton College. He's been the most organic member to DSA out of all of our politicians. He cut his teeth. In 2017, the first campaign he ever did was to campaign for a Palestinian man to be the city councillor in a region in the southern part of Brooklyn. And so, the fact that he has more robust experiences in struggle and organization has given him certain ideas about, how to promote class struggle in society is a testament, to the fact that, building more struggles will produce a new generation of leaders with a systematically, qualitatively different relationship to DSA, to be more organic to us, to take leadership from us. It's understandable that he's going to fall short. I'm not here to excuse everything. I think, especially if he's in the mayoral position, we'll have to retain the latitude to fight him sometimes. But nevertheless, there is a process that is being created around him that gives us a lot of space to fight, even though he doesn't go the whole distance himself. I lost him there.
And so would you like to respond to, I think it was that person's question over there about...
Just the comrade asked about what to do in terms of the Indonesian protests. I agree that the protests have been very inspiring and I think very important for the movement in Indonesia. There are several Indonesian comrades at the conference over the weekend, and there'll be opportunities to chat to them if you're able to stay for a little bit of the conference, but they're here tonight as well in the hall. There was also a solidarity protest organised by Indonesian students in Melbourne on Tuesday, and I wasn't able to get to that. Other comrades got to that, so I haven't really heard back about that. But I think there's wanting to do some more ongoing solidarity with the protest movement in Indonesia. So it is very inspiring and exciting.
Let's give a big show of appreciation for our three speakers tonight. We hope we've convinced you to come back. So tomorrow, Saturday, September the 6th, the first session, which will comprise of 4 workshops, and they will all begin at 9:30 a.m. and conclude at about 11 a.m. And so please check your conference guide for details and stick around for, just for a chat. And check out the art exhibition at Ecosocialism. It's featuring radical art from artists exploring themes responding to eco-socialist futures and potential impending barbarism from capitalism. And also tomorrow night, Saturday night, join us for dinner and drinks here at Balam Place. And thank you for attending this opening session. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. I encourage people to come back for the next 2 days. You don't want to miss out. During this conference, we are going to continue to talk about the big issues of our time: genocide, climate crisis, housing, the crisis of capitalism today. And we are going to be hearing from more incredible activists, unionists, First Nations activists, campaigners from across the country and the globe. And they all want to change the world and win a more hopeful and more sustainable and socially just future. So thanks everyone again.